Here we go. Yeah. So Jaffna, right, being a big population center for the Tamil people as opposed to, you said Sinhalese?
Sinhalese.
Sinhalese, yeah, who are the majority on the island. Is and so some of the early scenes are really beautiful and innocent. Kay and sometimes the brothers and Sashi, they go to the library. They're kids, they're all studying for these important examinations of different sorts, mostly medical schools and those kind of things to get in. But they're kids being kids, and the library is such a huge place for them. Um, Early on in the story, there's a scene where there's a political rally, and the family's like, "Do we go? Like, we want our kids to know what's going on, but at the same time, like, is it safe?" There's a shooting by, obviously the term militant is even loaded, but it's in the book, it's described as a militant, and the kind of back and forth begins. Boys on bikes are seen as, suspect. It's like, be careful. Um, I just wonder about the importance of that city, Jaffna, about the way that the family grows up and kind of where their political lives began, I guess. Was it something where you felt like they were really kind of apathetic or whatever, and then just kind of were forced into it? Kind of how they became involved? Like, did they have no choice?
Sure. So as you said, Jaffna is, it's a large city in the northern province. And it's historically like a majority Tamil city,
Mm-hmm.
although certainly including during parts of the war, it had both Sinhalese and Muslim um, residents.
Mm-hmm.
And um, the importance of Jaffna to the book. I did specifically want to write a book connected to Jaffna. There's been a lot of very fine Sri Lankan and Sri Lankan diaspora literature about the war.
Uh,
A lot of it is set in or around Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka, which is um, a place that experienced the war in very particular ways, but it was experienced very differently in Jaffna. And I grew up with both sets of stories because I have relatives from both places.
mm,
By and large, my family is connected to Jaffna. But I do also have close relatives who were in Colombo through this period of time or who
mm,
grew up in Colombo.
mm,
But it was sort of my feeling that I wanted to write a book that was set in Jaffna, um, and that felt like a Jaffna book.
mm,
And I guess that they, how political is the family? I mean, during this period of time, the political rally that's depicted in the book, like a lot of other things that happen in the book, did actually happen. There was actually a shooting
mm,
at that particular rally, and it's like many families, they have sort of varying degrees of involvement in politics. There's one brother, Aaron, who kind of is always like reading the newspaper and is like
mm,
young and wants to talk about the politics of stuff a lot. And then there's his dad, who kind of has a little bit more jaded view, but also is very pragmatic.
mm,
There's his oldest brother, who is kind of deeply ethical about it and is like, well, we're citizens, we have to participate. And then there's kind of Sashi's next oldest brother, Seelan, who's a bit hot tempered. He's the same age as Kay. Um, Her second brother, Thailand, who works at the library. So I don't know, they're like a middle class family, and
yeah.
they're sort of by personality emotionally involved in politics or not. Um, the father figure has been impacted by violence and politics. And he but yeah, I think even at the beginning of the book, he's someone who he hasn't been forced particularly to make, I don't know, life or death or hard choices about what his life will be like, how politics impacts it, like what will his political choices mean to his life.
Mm,
The stakes of those questions haven't been that high yet.
yeah.
And then suddenly they are, because he's at this rally with his sons, and he feels that they are in real peril.
Mm,
And so for him, it's like a little bit of a foreshadowing or kind of a wake up call of how things can turn violent very quickly.
yeah, that's for sure. I,
Yeah.
you know, there's always a shadow, or um always a shadow, and it's not mentioned, explicitly very many times. Like how much is, is colonialism, imperialism, like a huge part of this book? Like how much is that what settled so many of these things into motion? How much is that something that's, still recovering from, or still, feels the aftershocks of? Like, is it kind of like a shadowy figure, like almost like another character?
I like to think that I would not have phrased it that way, but I really like that phrasing. I may borrow it and use it from now on, Pete. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it would be easy to lay all of the sins of the war, the sins of the war at the door of colonialism, and I don't think we can quite do that. Because then that sort of, I don't know, it makes it seem like all the communities and stakeholders involved didn't have that much agency. Actually, they did. They
Mm,
had choices, right? Like there are a few moments in the book where um Sashi sort of says, and we could have done something different, and we didn't. So she's also trying to take an accounting and see like what she herself is responsible for and what her
mm,
community is responsible for, and that's also
mm.
part of what the book is about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's also certainly I take some digs at colonialism. Like there's a moment where what they're in some sort of oh, I know exactly where it is. It's like they're in a some characters are in a refugee camp, and a British aid worker kind of comes up to them and
Yeah.
says something in plummy tones about, how he pities them, and this is like it's intentionally sort of like a slightly scathing depiction, or someone
Mhm.
sort of says, oh, the aid worker is over, the British aid worker is available to help, but sort of the implication is that he won't be very helpful. um
Yeah.
So there are these moments where they're kind of international players, some of whom are British,
Mhm.
and they're not awesome.
No,
Um,
the UN
s-
guy, right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a variety of characters from different backgrounds, some British, some Indian.
Mm.
Right, there's Indian imperialism in this book as well, and
Mm.
that was another thing I kind of wanted to get in the book. Like, I think British imperialism. So a lot of literature of the former Commonwealth that indicts colonialism, very happy to join that tradition. And also I grew up with stories of Indian peacekeeping forces violence in
Mm.
Jaffna, and I had not seen those on a
Mm.
page in a book of fiction, which may attest more to the limits of my own reading than to what is
Mhm.
actually available.
Mm.
But still, I was pretty determined to put them in the book too.
Mm. Appreciate that. So, we talked about the library that was so such a community gathering place, and with the back and forth, it became, well, everyone, on the Tamil side, they're terrorists, so therefore we need to go in. There's a lot of echoes of, like, Palestine and Israel and kind of thing like that, and probably a lot of places around the world. But the library is burned down as one of the, in retaliation, supposedly. And, that's when, Sashi is studying for the big exams. There's this teacher, named so royally or so beautifully Sir, and he's so helpful to them. So, again, you talked about, like, what decisions do we make? Sashi kind of stops, and with Naranjan, the oldest brother, they decide to go to Colombo, the big city. They have their grandmother lives there. They can study in those ways. When the violence comes to their house, comes to their neighborhood, now what? You have so many of those, not so many, but enough, these like little interludes, or kind of asides, or like breaking the fourth wall, right? What would you do in this case? It's almost like a second person. How I wouldn't describe the book is definitely not second person, but like what were you hoping to accomplish with the breaking in, and really kind of like pause, time out, like let's put it back on you, reader?
I think the direct address in the book, which is I guess how I think of it instead of second person in particular,
Mhm.
um, the direct address to the reader. I think, when Love Marriage came out, for example, I was often put in the position of I was touring with that book during the year that the Sri Lankan Civil War ended, and I was often things happened to me like they would put me on the radio and sort of say, "We're going to expect you to gloss the war in 30 seconds." And I didn't grow up in Sri Lanka. No one, including people who grew up in Sri Lanka, should have to gloss the war in 30 seconds. And also, as a practical matter, I did it. Um, and I found being called on for that kind of explanation horrendous. And
Mm.
also I fully expect that I will have to do it again. So I think I had some frustration with explanation and the notion of it as explanation, the notion of any non-Anglo BIPOC narrative as a form of explanation.
Mm.
And then also like the very pragmatic question of like, well, how do I tell my story to an audience that doesn't have the basics that I have? Well, I can do two things. I can explain a lot, and I can like very obviously expect more and sort of
Okay.
say in the narrative that I'm expecting more, and sort of say like, are you paying attention? Are you kind of you dicking around? Like,
Uh,
are you skimming through this book and looking for kind of an easy path? And what does that mean about you? So I mean,
okay.
I say this with like so many people have read this book so generously and with such love, and I'm
Mm.
hugely appreciative of that. And I think also there was a version of me when I was writing it that was really angry about a variety of things. And that was one of them. Like, why should I have to explain actually?
Mhm.
But I'm going to. But since
Yeah.
I have to do it, I'm going to do it really mad. Um, so it was a little bit of like having my cake and eating it too, I suppose,
Yeah.
like as a narrative structure that gave me the ability to do that, to like give the explanation and then also say, please think about why you need this. Um,
Okay.
and then it's also a form of like self-interrogation, right? I can think about expecting more of the reader. I can also think about expecting more of myself. So there are moments where Sashi assumes who the reader is and sort of assumes, well, you couldn't possibly know this. Then
Mhm.
there are other moments where that doubles back on itself. And she says, I should stop actually assuming that I know what you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
Maybe you know more than I think. And so that was also kind of me calling myself out for maybe not expecting enough, like not
Yeah.
crediting, like I should be crediting my readers with being really smart.
Mhm.
I think they are. I think that people who read literary fiction by and large are people who are coming to those books for immersive worlds and immersive histories and are
Mhm.
able to infer and also know people are reading with the benefit of the internet. If you want to go and look
Yeah.
something up, you can,
Mhm.
or you can make the decision that you're going to infer based on context and you can go on.
Mhm.
So to credit people with understanding the tools that they have to accompany their reading, and also to kind of call myself out on my own assumptions, which can certainly be inaccurate, right? Because a lot of Sri
Mhm.
Lankans were going to read the book.
Mhm.
And I also remembered every instance in which I was at some sort of Asian American art performance or some sort reading some sort of Asian American thing that assumed that I wasn't there, that addressed itself to someone else. And I mean, often when people are asking, what audience are you writing for? They want to know if they're in it.
Mm. I'm sorry, the part you're saying about assuming you weren't there, that's you're saying that's what you were reading, or that you felt that way based
I guess
on.
I guess I'm thinking of other times when I have read work by not and I shouldn't just say Asian American, actually, times when I've read work by other writers, or when I've been at performances, or when I've been in a space with visual art or dance or something, and it has addressed itself to an audience that specifically like excludes the notion that I could be sitting there.
Okay. Okay.
Like, yeah, like say you go to a piece, you go to see a performance and it's by someone from a particular identity group and you're from the same identity group and you're sitting in the audience, but the work is addressing itself exclusively to say people who are white Americans.
Mm.
And that's the presumption under which it's operating. It's
Yeah.
operating as though you're not sitting there.
Mhm.
So I didn't want to do that either, because the book is also very specifically like it is actually for Sri Lankans. Like if
Yeah.
you are Sri Lankan, you will get things out of it that other people won't, because all of the
Sure.
readers are different. They're
Sure.
bringing different things to it. And if you're Tamil, you'll get different things out of it. And if you're from
Mhm.
Jaffna, you'll get different things out of
Mm.
it. So kind of acknowledging the variety of readers also.
Mm. Getting to a point where I want to, start tiptoeing or stopping, the plot spoilers, because this book needs to be read. There's so much going on, but you know, one thing, obviously, one of the very climactic events, pivotal events, is that Naranjan does disappear, and it's I think that's where Brotherless Night starts. It's one of those nights where where is he? What's going on? This idea that so many people in the Civil War and had to, have a burial without a body. And, you can just imagine the pain of not knowing what happened to your son, your daughter, your father, right? And, so with that, obviously, there are the younger brothers, and they're pissed off. They're pissed off with the world, and rightfully so. Sashi's pissed off. Sashi's saying, what could I have done? Could I have done anything differently? Grandma, do should we blame? Do you blame the father? The father was MIA, kind of literally. And once the Naranjan passed, he's in great pain, of course, but he's not really around much, and he's kind of an impotent figure. Do we? I don't know. Do you judge him, or are you saying like, hey, here's the character, and treat him as you will?
Do I judge him? That's interesting. I think the notion of being someone who works outstation, which is the term of sort of being someone who, travels to other places comes home on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty common.
Okay.
And that's what he does. That's realistic. And it does also disconnect him from his family. And so I think that there are a lot of ways in which like the care and emotional life of the family is built around the mother. And that's also something that I think maybe he doesn't he only sometimes seems to mind.
Hmm.
So he sort of sometimes he comes back and kind of like has a lot of opinions, and sometimes when he doesn't know, when he's not sure what is to be done, that's very convenient for him. And so it is his wife who
Yes.
is called to rise to the occasion to protect her children or care for them under unprecedented circumstances.
Yeah.
I guess I judge him a little bit. It certainly sounds like I judge him a little bit. Um, and also there are moments of enormous tenderness when I like him a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he um he also is always rewinding in his head to think about what could he have done differently.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, we talked about the direct address, so much profundity. There's one line is, I want you to understand it does not matter if you cannot imagine the future, still relentless it comes. And it does come, and life goes on, but it also doesn't. And they're all affected in their own ways, and not to justify violence and things like that, but how do you not be empathetic or sympathetic to those who lost their brother, their daughter, their son? How would you not be pissed off at the world, pissed off at those who did it? I thought it was really interesting where Sashi passes that big test for medicine after he died, and before she was kind of iffy with her hands, and she just talks about like kind of like, what is there to fear now? Like, I can pass this test, it's no big deal. And that was so sad and depressing and sweet at the same time. It's like, usually that would be like, oh, awesome, you let go of your fears, but it's kind of like, yeah, I let go of my fears, like nothing worse can happen. I've already lost my brother and that kind of thing, right? So with that, in tracing the history of Sri Lanka, different offshoot groups. We, of course, everyone knows, most people know about the Tamil Tigers. There's also the offset groups. And, some decide to join, some decide not, all for these different reasons. And again, without justifying the violence, but you don't make it a binary. You don't make it this group terrible, this group great, this group saints, this group, whatever the opposite is. I wonder how it's one thing to say, like, I'm not going to pick sides or whatever, or, how did you not oversimplify the situation? How did you leave room for so many stories for, Anjali, who, deserves a book of her own and deserves a whole podcast episode of her own, the beautiful, teacher and kind of older sister, like for Sashi, she, her history and what she continues to do and all the good stuff. How did you make it such a multifaceted story without really flattening and simplifying?
Thank you for saying all of that. I'm sure that there must be people out there who think that I did. I haven't heard from them yet. I'm sure that there are people also with political differences. I think that my book actually has fairly clear politics, in that it's multifaceted. It also, I mean, it has in it some stories that are very clearly, like, very clearly indict the tigers,
Yeah, yeah,
the state, the international community,
all the above.
um, Tamil civil society for some of how it handled things,
Mm,
you know, and a variety of other actors that I'm not even naming.
mm,
So, like, for example, like, there, the tigers were, both the tigers and the state in my childhood were like genius purveyors of propaganda. They
mm,
told stories that left out their atrocities and glorified
yeah.
their what they did, the actions that were more obviously defensible or nationalist.
Mm,
And so a lot of what I've done is simply to include things based on fact, sometimes accounts very close to what happened, that were like elided or obscured or
mm,
omitted from those propaganda versions. And again, I think there, like, I don't like being lied to. And again, I was mad.
mhm,
So,
mm,
um, this was my way to put all of that in.
mm,
Um, so for example, you referred to, I do refer to the Tigers as militants. And there were other Tamil militant groups as well, many, which had their own political histories, their own crimes, etc. And there are details in the book about these groups fighting each other. Those are also based on fact. So I think, like, what I did was to try to include a balanced set of those stories. Like, I couldn't
right,
include all of them,
right.
but I could curate to reflect my willingness to be critical of different actors.
Hmm.
And I did also have, I'm thinking of one friend in particular who was reading along as I was writing each chapter, and I would hand it to her. And then she would tell me what I was getting wrong, like historical facts or what have you, or you could put this in, you should think about it. This part seems heavy handed, take it out. And I trust her politics. And a lot of the people I talked to who were critical of, for example, people like the Tigers or the state, were also, on the basis of like individual stories, very willing to give others space and room and credit, and to account for their complex histories. They would say, like, oh, X person had been in the Tigers, and then, I don't know, then they left. They moved overseas, they came back. Like, I don't know, like, all of these stories were so, they were not necessarily tidy. And so it
Yeah,
was very possible to put in those untidy stories,
yeah.
which the propaganda couldn't contain.
I don't know if pressure is a word, but I feel like it's a pressure, or probably like, I don't know, something that probably pushed you on to make it so great. But just this idea of, like, even by you talking about, like, your friend, your editor was like, oh, you could put this part in. Like, I got to think that even by not including some things, you're making like a choice,
For
right?
sure. For
And that's,
sure.
it goes back to your journalist, background, even writer, like a historian, like, this idea of, it's kind of like, if you say I'm not being political, you're actually making a political decision by being apolitical. We'll wait for the 6-part Oprah Winfrey series. There's so much more that, there should be a whole nother episode with just spoilers, because but we want to leave it alone. We want people to read it. You know Priya's story, oh man, Priya's story, and excuse me, that hunger strike that you referenced, that was kind of the basis, are just deserving of episodes of their own. The family dynamics, some of those awkward, to say the least, dinners and meals together at home, and the tenderness. One last thing I would say is, you were talking about how maybe you felt like that was some of your anger coming out with, like, the direct address, and I see that, and I can understand what you're talking about. But, like, I've seen a lot of reviewers say about the book, like, I felt like those were so tender. Those were so tender to say. I had one of those other lines written down. How can we act as though that did not happen? What would you have done in his shoes? And just, like, giving grace to people, and just a tenderness, like, that doesn't mean it's some Mickey Mouse, like, happy ending, like, definitely not. but there's just such a sense of tenderness that you're able to play along with, with what are some really dark days at times. So congratulations on the book. I think it was Britt Bennett said, in the blurb, like it's an unputdownable book, something to that effect. And that is right on. Again, I want to encourage everybody who's listening, get Brotherless Night, read it. You will not ever regret it. Where should we buy it?
Thank you so much, Pete, for having me. Where should you buy it? My local indie is Majors and Quinn, and if you want me to sign a copy for you, you can
Ah,
order from them and put a note in that says that, and I'll go into the store and happily do it.
cool.
Um, but yeah, any great independent bookstore near you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Do you I'm not sure the anniversary. I'm not sure how long it's been out in the world.
It came out on January 3rd.
Okay. So the year anniversary is coming up pretty soon. There's the cool cover if you're watching. There's the British cover, the UK cover. And I guess you'd be on your right, on her left shoulder there. You again have written just a saga, the way that you see the family evolution or de-evolution or whatever you want to say, just their changes over the years as well as the country. It could only be done in that way with the retrospective and the flashback. So you could sit on this one for the rest of your life. I wrote Brotherless Night, done, drop the mic. But I wonder if you want to share any future projects, maybe.
Um, that's a great question. I have certainly I did spend a really long time on this book, and it was I'll leave it to others to decide how. I appreciate all of the generosity with which you've read this, and I do think, yeah, like I said, I love the characters a lot, and so to look at that dark material with them alongside me
Hmm.
made it not only bearable but at times really enjoyable.
Hmm.
And so yes, it was also written with a lot of love. I think that, like, yeah, I worked on it for a long time, and after I was done, I was a little bit of a scorch mark.
Hmm.
And so I was on sabbatical for a year, and during that sabbatical, I noodled around with various things, but haven't settled on anything in particular yet. I also just like did a lot of sleeping, um,
There you go.
which continues to sound continues to sound so appealing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I needed a break. I have like a strange idea for a comic novel. I did
Huh.
teach humor while I was um working on this book, and in this book, I think there is some humor in it, but it's of a certain kind. And I think if I were to try on a specific comic form, that would be an interesting challenge for me.
Hmm.
Um, I'm also working on some essays and some short stories, so we'll see which one of those three I kind of settle into.
We talking like Mad Magazine humor, like Onion satire, like just like haha funny, like laugh out loud.
I think if I were to liken it to something, like the two old men who sit in the Muppets gallery and
Yeah.
laugh at everyone,
Yes. Yes.
it would be like them.
Okay. They weren't necessarily mean spirited, were they? Were they like mean spirited, or were they kind of more like I definitely remember them. It's been a minute.
I Are they mean spirited? Sometimes they're mean spirited,
Yeah.
but sometimes they're just, I don't know, making silly puns. I think,
Yeah.
comic work that I recently have admired. Julie Schumacher is one of my colleagues. I think her Dear Committee Members trilogy is absolutely brilliant. The third one
Mm.
is out now. And my friend Curtis Sittenfeld wrote romantic comedy, which is realistic and also like just really, really funny, and also very tender in its storytelling. And I love that book a lot. And so I think if I were to try to write something funny, I would try to, I don't know, I think it would be a great stretch to try to
Yeah.
imitate kind of the sharpness of Julie's comic timing,
Mm.
her light but fearless hand with puns,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. Well, good luck with that. I've already recommended the book to two people. Many more to come. Obviously, people listening, this is a major recommendation. I was telling you before we started recording, like, you take a book in viscerally or a movie in, and like right after the end of it, you're like, oh my God, it's the best movie I've ever seen in my life. I've had a few that are a little kind of embarrassing that I wouldn't even admit right now, that like after I saw them and then the more I thought about it, I was like, ugh. this book, when I finished it, was like, oh my God, this is one of the most memorable, one of the best books I've ever read. And then, yep, a day later, 2 days later, it's like, yes, that is a book for the ages. So congrats. It's awesome to talk to you. It's kind of late on your side of the country, so I appreciate you being so clear-headed and intelligent and thoughtful, even at kind of a later hour. Thanks again, and good luck with your continued work.
Thank you so much for having me, Pete. I really appreciate all of your thoughtful questions and I really admire your show. And it's a treat to be on with you.
I appreciate you so much.